Welcome to the MARPE Network. The MARPE Network is a network of 5 European partners, all institutes of higher education. We are located in Portugal, Spain, France, Belgium, and Romania. And we are partners since 1992, which means that we really share a lot of stories amongst each other. All 5, we are also members of EUPRERA, the European Public Relations, Education and Research Association, which, on its turn, is a member of the Global Alliance. And that explains why we are able to share our insights on the Global Alliance platform. As a network, over the years, we developed several education and research projects, some of them being funded by Erasmus. Back in 2012, we were funded a 3-year project on lobbying and governmental affairs in a European perspective. This 3-year project brought together our master students and academics and professionals from all over Europe. We had several evaluations, and based on the results, we discovered that if we would just dig a little bit deeper, we would find some very interesting potential new projects. So we decided just to brainstorm and we wrote a new application form. We were successful and Erasmus funded this new project for 3 years. This project is based on 3 pillars. The first one is directly related to lobbying and governmental affairs. It's about public diplomacy. Now, in different parts of the world, public diplomacy is a very well-known concept. And you find a lot of different programs, education and research programs devoted to public diplomacy, which is not immediately the case for Europe. In Europe, public diplomacy is still not that well known. Besides public diplomacy, we decided to also develop 2 other pillars. The second one is corporate diplomacy, and the third one is civic diplomacy. Now, you would think that those 3 pillars could be the subject of our talk today, but we will focus just on one. And the one we want to talk about is corporate diplomacy. You would think from a native, an English native perspective, that corporate diplomacy is quite an obvious concept. Well, we are on the old continent. And in Europe, you have to deal with cultural diversity. As I told you, we are 5 European partners from 5 different countries, which means that while we have all our own country history, we have our own political developments, and we also have our own language, or in some cases, languages to deal with. So when you develop a new concept, you would wish to just share one common and consensual understanding on that concept in order to develop a body of knowledge, wouldn't you? Well, it's not that easy when you are dealing with all those different perspectives on history and on politics. Because just take, for example, Portugal and or Spain, and on the other hand, Romania. Total different history, total different political developments over the years. And these had a tremendous impact on how corporate linked to diplomacy could be understood. So in order for you to have a better understanding of how concepts are developed within an educational perspective, in order to bring some new curricula at the end, we will take you on a path, because the path dependence theory is a theory which really makes sense for us. And we will bring you first to Portugal and then to Romania in order to give you some insights on history and politics from both countries. So let us start with Portugal first. And I invite my colleague Susana to just share a conceptual and more contextual perspective on both the two terms being on the one side corporate and on the other side diplomacy, so that you will have a first insight from a first perspective. Susanna, the floor is yours. We are now going to Portugal, and I think we are just going into the 70s.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. And yes, we will make a travel in the story of Portugal, trying to find the different path that the term corporate has now in Portuguese language and collective memories. Everybody knows that a language is a life entity, and the meaning of each word also has a social, political, and economic context. So, let's begin by the dictionary meaning of the word corporate. According to Primera Dictionary, corporate is 1. Organized or based on a corporation or the interests of a corporation, and 2. Regarding a corporation. This definition leads us to the question, and what is the definition of corporation? Well, the same dictionary defines corporation as 1. Collectivity subject to the same rule or statute or which government matters of public interests, and 2. Set of people with affinities, namely professional or ideological, that unifies or organize with a goal to common interests. So, the first thing to reflect. In Portuguese language, the word corporate reports to the word corporation, a unity of people with the same affinities and common interests. This definition of corporation is very similar to the definition given by Oxford Dictionary. So, and for now, I would say that the term corporation in Portuguese or in English has similar meanings. But if we look at the story, we will see the influence of the cultural, the political, and economic contexts in the world. Thus, the Portuguese corporate state was an idea put into practice in the early years of 1930s. Throughout those years, the guidelines for the definition of Estado Novo became known. The National Union was created of a civic political nature as well as other structures to support the regime. In 1950 was created the Ministry of Corporation. According to Dulce Freire, Nuno Estevão Ferreira, and Ana Margarida Rodrigues, during the Estado Novo, 1933 to 1974, a dense network of corporatist institutions which covered the whole Portuguese territory was built. These institutions had various economic, social, and cultural functions and operate in a parallel system connected to the central government. Following the authoritarian political matrix, the Estado Novo ensured tight control over the regular activities of each body. According to the same authors, the corporations were present in the different economic sectors: agriculture, fishing, industry, and trade. Their members were bodies as mandatory guilds, optional guilds, farming guilds, national unions, people's houses and fishermen houses, or federations. Its constitution initiative came from public authorities and by a government decree and had a national geographic scope. In April 1974, when the dictatorship was overthrown, there were about 2,250 organizations spread across different hierarchical levels. The corporate system began to be extinguished and transformed in the month following the Revolution of April 25, 1974. In the early years after the revolution, we assisted to the nationalization of the economic structures. From a corporate system, we turn to corporativism. After the revolution, many cooperatives were built, mainly in the agricultural sector. These were constituted by workers who decide how to run the interests of that class or production sector. We can say that this corporativism, after 1974, intend to constitute a political and economic alternative to capitalism, eliminating the boss and the middleman and granting the worker the ownership of his work instruments and the participation in the results of his own performance. These cooperatives were, from the beginning, an expression of a business nature of the workers' movement. Nowadays, some cooperatives still remain, mostly for wine, milk and food sectors, and also in some cultural fields, with its own management model and with a legal framework. So, we can say that the connection to the term corporate moved from an authoritarian state corporatism to a corporativism concept, and today to what is called social corporativism, that is a form of tripartite economic corporatism based on the social partnership between the capital and labor interests, involving collective bargaining between employers and unions representatives and government mediate at a national level. Also, the term corporate and the term cooperative have different meanings. Both words usually are connected, as cooperative is also a corporation in the sense that is a collectively subject to the same rule or statute. So, in fact, we can say that the term corporate expresses a common memory connected with an authoritarian state, but also with a socialist ideology, more than a social partnership between the capital and labor interests. Nevertheless, in the Portuguese language, corporate or corporate spirit is commonly synonymous of a relatively closed system with private interests and maintenance of privileges of a certain ideological or professional class. It is very close to the meaning of guild, which is a term that exists in Portuguese language, but which is not in common use. Thus, in order to avoid the plurality of meanings and different prejudices associated with the term corporate, the translation is not done literally, although there is a term in Portuguese, but translating it into business, or the most of the time, keeping the expression in English. These memories associated to the term put us in misunderstandings when it comes to use concepts as corporate communication or corporate diplomacy. In first case, it tends to be replaced by the term public relation or institutional communication. And in the second case, the expression is usually kept in English with a strong connection to business. But as I mentioned earlier, the term corporate in its origin involved business dimensions, but above all, social, cultural, and political dimensions. Thus, and with regard to the concept of corporate diplomacy, understanding it in a way only connected with business makes it very narrow. Choosing an expression as organizational diplomacy is a way to get around the negative connections which some language and cultures associate with the corporate term, but also giving it a broader dimension, allowing to include not only the business world, but also private organizations from the third sector, such as NGOs, social, cultural, political, or other kind of association, or even international organizations. So, Anka, do we have some similar understanding and collective memories and connections with the term corporate? Tell us about the Romanian reality and language.
Thank you, Susanna. Always hearing about Portugal is very interesting. We're gonna move to the other side of Europe and talk a little bit about the Romanian perspective and how we understand the term corporate in Romania. We do have some common aspects, but we'll see that actually history shifts the understanding a little bit more. Not just current history, but let's say 50, 60, 70 years ago will have a very strong impact on how we understand corporate, the term corporate. So looking at the dictionary definitions of corporate, we will see that actually we have a similar understanding. So whenever you look at Romanian language dictionaries now, you will see that the definitions go towards two directions. One is the direction where the term corporate means guild, and it is strongly related to the medieval understanding of the term. So we are talking about guilds protecting their interests, organizing themselves in order to, let's say, optimize their activity and even impose their interests, or at least advance them. On the other hand, we have a different understanding, a current one. And for Romania, this is strongly impacted by the shift from communism to democracy that took place after the 1989 revolution. So basically, if we look at the second understanding of corporate, we will see that it is strongly related to a United States meaning. It is sometimes actually presented like this in a US understanding or from a US point of view. So the second understanding is that it relates to companies that are traded at a stock exchange, that have shareholders, and basically they are strongly related to business. So this is the second understanding that we have whenever we look at Romanian dictionaries at the term corporate. Now, Susanna mentioned, related to Portugal, about let's say memories or negative understanding of the term that comes from the memory of let's say negative government actions. We actually do not have this type of understanding, just because when Romania switched to communism in the 40s, we actually saw let's say the dissipation of any private entity. The state took over. So and it did not use this term, the term corporate. We did have collective structures, but the term corporate wasn't really used, as it did have let's say commercial connotation to it, and through that a market connotation and a private market connotation. So basically at this point it is useful to look at how the term corporate is used in day-by-day life, because in terms of communication practice, that plays a very important role. So at this point, when we talk about corporate, we usually use a family of words in Romanian. So we have corporativ, we have corporatist, we have corporatiști. The first two, with some nuances, refer to different aspects related to corporations, so to the structures. The third one refers to people that work in corporations and people that, let's say, support the idea that corporations are one of the major, if not the most important, engines behind a good, a strong economy. So, in terms of social use, the term corporate applies primarily, if not exclusively, to the business sector. If you go on the streets in Romania right now and you ask someone about corporation, they will instantaneously think about a company, a large company, a multinational company. So we do have that understanding. Not every company is a corporation, but usually multinationals are corporations. And an important thing to mention here is that usually this term is associated in terms of social use with the idea of companies, of foreign companies coming to the Romanian market. Now, in terms of professional communication use, things are a little bit more nuanced. Most of the times when we are looking at classes about corporate communication, we will look at classes that focus on business communication. It does depend if you are in, let's say, communication school and a business school. If you are in a business school, then it would be business communication all the way. Corporate is only business. If you are in a communication or a corporate communication class in a communication school, then you will most of the times focus on business communication, but you will get also the nuance of the fact that corporate does refer to structures, to organizational structures, and therefore we can apply this term to other areas, such as, let's say, NGOs or small companies, or even state structures, right? But there is an interesting thing to mention here. So whenever we use the terms in Romanian, we use them relating to business. If we use them in English, so for example, say corporate identity, then we can apply those to other structures, other non-commercial, non-profit structures. No. So I can use, for example, corporate identity or corporate image to talk about the identity or the image of an NGO or a small company. If I use that term in Romanian, identitate corporativă, imagine corporativă, then I will most likely be understood from a business perspective. So when we switch to Romanian, the understanding is business, and that is a legacy of the transfer, the switch from communism to democracy, from a very controlled market to the free market. So the free market and democracy were associated with the companies, with corporations coming in. They were seen as an element of, let's say, welfare and of economic growth. But when we go to English, we do have some elements of the fact that in English, corporate does not refer only to business. Okay, so that is for me an interesting differentiation between the two terms. Of course, there are other nuances, but these are the most important in terms of practice. And talking about the use of the word corporate in the Romanian public sphere, another element to mention is the connotation of the term corporatist or corporatiști, which referred to the people working in corporations. So this over time got to the point where it started to have a negative connotation, mostly as a critique to, let's say, the fact that people working in corporations basically have less personal time and are fully committed to the structure, to the process of the corporation, and basically develop their life, even their personal life within the corporation. So basically, this in time started to develop a negative connotation for the term corporatist, and now it is even used as a derogatory term in order to refer to the young people mainly, who are considered to be almost selling their personal identity in order to have financial comfort. This is debated, not exactly the understanding, but whether it should be or corporatist, the people working in corporations, should be seen that way. I am sure that this is not a Romanian discussion, it is a global discussion, but it is important to mention that in linguistic terms and in terms of day-by-day use, in Romania we do have the same understanding. So just to sum up, in Romanian terms, whenever we talk about corporate, we do think about the business organizations most of the times, with nuances, but there is a clear dominant. And when we are talking about, just as Susanna mentioned, when we are talking about corporate diplomacy for our MARPE Diplo project, we came across this problematic understanding, this very reductive understanding of corporate diplomacy. From Susanna's point of view, so from a Portuguese point of view, it is reductive and problematic. From our point of view, it does limit the understanding to just the business sector. So this is another reason why we started to move from corporate diplomacy towards organizational diplomacy, and we are actually debating the benefits and the limits of this switch. But it was a very interesting thing to discover in our project, the fact that we did have this shared perspective from two opposite sides of Europe, and that was a very interesting way to connect and to discover bridges across Europe. So that was a brief description, a brief presentation of the Romanian perspective on the term corporate and its use both in practice and in communication practice and in day-by-day life. And I give the floor to Anne-Marie to bring the perspectives together.
Thank you very much, Anka. Well, I'm pretty convinced that now it is obvious for all of you who are following us today that when you bring those different perspectives together, history, politics, but also the linguistic perspective, it is quite problematic to find a common ground and to have a consensual understanding of what corporate diplomacy is. As you could understand from those different insights that were shared with you, well, it's quite clear that corporate diplomacy is often understood as linked to profit organizations only, while we also experienced, when we were dealing with these concepts with our master students during our last intensive study program back in November, it had also to deal with non-for-profit organizations. So what we decided to do is just to take a step back and to look to this concept from a communication perspective. So we were able to find a common denominator. And who better than Hélène to disclose the decision that we've taken all together.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Yes, indeed, the word corporate has different definitions and more precisely different connotations in different countries in Europe. However, Our research makes us consider all types of organization, whether they are businesses or non-profit organizations. That is why we are going to continue our work by shifting away from corporate diplomacy to now address the notion of organizational diplomacy. This will help us to reduce the dissonance caused by the use of the word corporate, and this should lead us to refocus on the true essence of the problem. What more does diplomacy bring in addition to communication or public relations? To explore this question together, come and meet us at the next EUPRERA Congress in Pamplona, where we will be hosting a panel discussion. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to keep up with our news and follow the progress of our research. Check our website, marpenetwork.eu, and see you soon on the MARPE Network.